We came to the south, me, I'm Guy from Lund, Anders from Lund, to talk about the north. Sorry about those people who come from the north and don't want to be reminded about the north just now while they're in Syros. We're going to talk about Scandinavian housing commons. And I think we're listed in the program that we were going to talk about gentrification. We will do that as well, but we have decided to open up the theme a bit to connect better to the overall theme of the summer course, which is about commons and conflicts and disaster. And we have been very nice over the past few days. We've been listening. We've been trying to insert a few of the discussions and points that have been made over the past few days about commons, following, for example, the discussion after the talk by Stefania on the commons, etc. So we hope that you will enjoy this talk. It's a bit different than the other ones maybe, but we hope that you will enjoy the talk. Anyway, so we'll bring in what we do a bit more of an urban angle to the existing work of political ecology, as we have been discussing over the past few days, has a bit of an anti-urban bias. So we'll try to compensate for that with this talk. Good. It is the case, that Anders and I, we talk a lot, and we discuss, and we drink a few too many beers, and then we discuss even more. We've never been working together properly, actually. We've never been presenting together, never been writing a paper together, so this is our little premiere, if you like. And the reason, or one of the reasons for our more intense cooperation is that in a Scandinavian context, not only in Scandinavia, of course, but not least in Denmark, not least in Sweden right now, we are facing an acute and rapidly growing shortage of affordable housing. Not an overproduction of housing, but a serious underproduction of housing, certainly in the segment of affordable housing. So what Anders and I have decided to do, and we've only recently started to do that, so this is definitely work in progress, early work in progress, is to revive our research, bring together our bodies of research, old and new, because we both have been working on issues of urban development and housing transformations in Scandinavia. So we hope to sort of reconstruct, if possible, the recent history of changes in the housing sector and in urban development by putting our bodies of research together. What we also see, in the face of this acute housing shortage in Sweden and other Scandinavian countries is a revival, or maybe you could even say an emergence of groups that have become very active activists and start fighting the sell-off of municipal housing, etc. And these groups, as I'll show in a minute, have become quite active, very well organized, and we would like, through our research, to connect with that emerging activist field. We have, for the record, we also started this informal academic network called CRUSH, not only because it's a nice name to use, but it stands for something, Critical Urban Sustainability Hub, a network of academics across Sweden and Copenhagen who are interested in these issues of affordable housing from a critical perspective, a network which we hope to formalize over the next few months if we get money. The work we will present today will be part, hopefully, I'm selling the beer before it's shot, but we've set up a theme issue in Geografiska, as we call it in English, or Geografiska in Swedish. So watch that space. Hopefully we'll be there. Good. I will go through a few overall themes we are trying to develop in our talk and by putting our research together. So, as I already said, what we want to do is, to reconstruct the transformation of urban development, of housing provision, of gentrification in a Scandinavian context to understand, what is happening today. We try to do that in a as nuanced way as possible and avoid, what I think it was Savage called it, the populism. We try to avoid to periodize recent history into certain periods or stages. Like first we had social democracy in Sweden, all was well, and then the bad guys came and privatized everything, and now we have neoliberalism. So it's a bit more complicated than that, of course. So we would like to stress, throughout our work, without ignoring that there are trends and tendencies and structural transformations. Okay. But nevertheless, we have to take into account that we are facing hybridities, contradictory constellations, or as Brad Christophers calls it in his one of his articles in New Political Economy, housing provision in Sweden today is something of a monstrous hybrid, between deregulation, between ruins of social democracy, between bits and bobs that are still, firmly in place, and a process of deregulation. We would also, for those who are not familiar with Scandinavia and know it through the newspapers, even The Guardian, there is a bit of a mythology about Scandinavia, the Scandinavian model. All is well in Scandinavia. If you want to have inspiration, you can look at Scandinavia. And if something bad happens in Sweden, and that's why I got fed up with reading The Guardian, then they say even in Sweden, confirming the status quo. That's what you have. All is well, and even in Sweden it can go wrong. So we would like to eat into that a bit. So we'll talk about welfare provision, the changing nature of welfare provision through housing in Sweden, changing nature of gentrification. And the point we would like to make, and that came up in the discussion after Stefania spoke, variations of commons. Old commons may disappear, certainly in housing commons in Scandinavia, but new, very peculiar versions of commons appear. So we have old ones disappearing, new ones common. That is even true in the Scandinavian context of housing provision. So we would like to play a bit, with that idea. And something we've been talking about quite a bit as well is, the production of knowledge. How do we produce knowledge given, our position as a researcher, the way we approach these things? How do we tell this story? How do we make sense of this story? Because you can do it in 20 different ways. We all know that. And I, for example, I come from the outside. I come from Belgium. I look at Scandinavia, and I've been doing that for the past 7 or 8 years, doing research there. But I'm an outsider. I don't know the details. I have to be careful that I don't step on too many toes. Like, who are you? Come here and tell us what's happening. Anders comes from exactly the opposite angle. I'm sure he will talk about that a bit. Anders has been very active in housing policies and an activist in housing. So he's an insider, struggling to keep some distance, and get away from the details. So we're complementary. We're going to do the perfect story. Good. Anders will probably come back somehow to the movie and then say something about some case studies I've been doing in Copenhagen, Denmark, and then I will come back again and come with a case study I am carrying out now in Sweden, which is sort of, so and in that way we hope to construct some kind of sensible story of what has happened and give you a fair picture of the housing commons in Scandinavia.
So how to try to make a kind of a transition from this walking thing in New York to talking about Scandinavian housing. It's not an easy little thing, but I do think, one way to look at it is this thing that has been coming up over the last few days, is looking at the rent-seeking behaviors. And certainly, if you look at New York City, it was founded, or from its initial start, they are building on this myth. It's called the $24 question, or myth. So this was the situation where this guy, Peter, in 1626, bought the island of Manhattan for what equivalent to $24. So it is being referred to as the $24 question. And this of course gives them entitlement in their deeply inherent way of thinking about their relations to nature, that they have the entitlement to this particular island where I was walking about those days. So the right to the city is the property right to the city. But then you have of course a lot of resistance towards these kinds of things. They try to gather around the slogan of the right to the city and question this taken for granted notion of the property right to the city, because this is just there. And this is so, and they are therefore also taking this rent-seeking procedures from some of the thinking that came out of Marx's work in the end, where he talks about primitive accumulation, and then of course linking that a little bit to the kind of things that Harry is talking about when he talks about accumulation by disposition. This as being not something that it went on past in the day, and now, I mean, this has been established, but it's something, it's a continuation, and this is Harry's point, and there are different other takes on this, but in the bottom of it is a rent-seeking behavior, and then you can transfer it to the theme of today, gentrification, and then you can connect to the work of Neil Smith, who did this article called the rent gap, and then this is the camp I enter into, and then a supervisor sitting at the back and he did my thesis, who was known for a period as the rent gap, because he did an analysis in Sweden, where he had an empirical, a lot of theoretical things also about rent from different angles, but then taking Neil's suggestion on board, and then trying to make a thorough empirical study, historical materials study about this phenomenon in a Swedish context, which has all kinds of implications. But anyway, this is the kind of camp I come from. So, a little, I mean, this will take too much time. I have to speed up. I will just skip some of the stuff later. Anyway, just a little bit of information from New York. So if you want to look into how people has been trying to deal with this in this context where things are really, really hard when it comes to these rent-seeking procedures, then I can suggest you have a look at this book by Tom Angotti called New York for Sale. Community Planning Confronts Local Real Estate. Well, in this book, he tries to tease out what has been going on. He's himself a community planner, he calls it. We can call it an activist, we can call it whatever we want to call it. Now he's a professor in planning, so it's a good way to talk about it. To see what kind of struggles has been going on historically, which one were successful and which one were not successful, and what is the implications for our further thinking about these kinds of things. So it's very kind of logical, it goes through it. And so it may seem like, why should I care about these kinds of things, but I do think that they are fighting the core of some of the things that some of us is trying to think about when we are looking at these things. And he has some suggestions in it. It's very rare because it's very dangerous terrain to try to come up with some suggestions for people who are in these situations around the world. And he has some strategies for the land, some strategies for the people. And so he goes through 6 strategies for the land: expand the public trust and consolidate community land, connect land and people, consolidate the urban commons, create a land bank for the commons, regulate the commons, create more community land trust. Strategies for the people: promote quality of life instead of the growth machine. Think locally, regionally, globally. Take comprehensive planning back into the future. Think of the 7th generation. So these are his suggestions. So it may be a very instrumental take, but it is meant as some suggestions where people can begin to think about these kinds of things. And then we can take the thing to Copenhagen, where I am from. I've been doing a bit of engagement with some of these things that goes on there. And I could tell you a story about the Ungdomshuset, which is the youth house in Copenhagen. It was huge back some years back. Fighting in the streets, police violence, 7 days in a row. A big thing. I could take you deep into, try to do like a deep understanding of what went on in that particular spot. Or we could go to Christiania. Some of you may know this spot in Copenhagen. I think I have included the slide. I can't remember. Maybe. Yes! So Christiania was founded in 1971 as a free city. It's a squatter community, so they went into this old military area in the city where the military had left. It has been standing there for some time, so they squatted the thing. And today around 900 people are living there, and it's a pretty huge chunk of the land. And it still stays there. I could tell you the story of that, try to make sense of some of the struggles that have been dealing with. However, I will not do that. I would like you to pay attention to the picture in the right corner, which is a very unassuming built thingy that doesn't look very cool to look at. Not much activism going on there, right? But these things are something that is called almennyttige boliger. So it is housing of common use, if you translate it literally, or we could call it non-profit housing. This is where I want to place my talk today. Because I'm living in one of those. I've done that for 17 years and have been elected to sit on different things in this connection. So I have done a little bit of politics in relation to what is going on there. But before we go to the particularities, I would like to start with just stressing this thing about the housing question, coming back a little bit to the more general these rent-seeking procedure, because that was what Engels were after. But he did this walking. Now we are walking in New York, 21st century. Engels did a bit of walking in Manchester when this urbanization was emerging, and he came to some conclusions. The conclusion was that it could not be solved within the system. I mean, the housing question would not be solved thoroughly within the system, and we needed to challenge the whole system. And as I was exploding the other day, one of the things that he also made clear that it is not about housing per se. It's about trying to connect what was then referred to as rural and the urban, and try to build some kind of an understanding of this thing. And then he he has a footnote, a little footnote, that tickled my interest. Because he says in this little footnote, the Danish socialists, who are ahead of all others, saw this long ago. So I thought, oh, what? I hope for the Danes, what the fuck is so I tried to have a look at it, what did he mean? We had a guy called Harokopio who founded the socialist labor movement in Denmark, inspired by the Paris Commune, director of the Danish branch of the First International. And he orchestrated the first workers' strike in Denmark. It is referred to as slaget på Fælleden, which literally can be translated into the battle of the commons. And so this is exactly this guy's policies that were very dangerous for the other side, because he tried to do some of the things that Engels were talking about, this looking at the whole system kind of procedure. And so he was imprisoned before this, 3 days before this assembly was being carried out, and he was deported to the US a few years later, and then the events resulted in a more cautious course for the movement. And this is what Engels would call bourgeois socialism. So in Engels' view, the talk that I will give you now is totally wrong, because I mean we shouldn't pay attention to these bourgeois strategies within the social democratic movement. But I will have a go at it anyway. I mean, I'm sure that Engels would be furious and he would be the one shouting at me. But I do think that you could learn something. So this is the kind of place where the talk becomes even more boring. I've tried to look at it in a more systematic way because, as I've told you, I've been active in this thing for 8 years, been elected at different places in this movement in Denmark. And so it's very hard to distance yourself. That's also why I explode sometimes, because it's something that I have my skin in. But I've tried to do it now. I have not been active in the movement directly for 7 years now, and have tried to think these things over. And lately I've tried to do it more systematically with the help of a colleague in Lund, Hansen, who is into historical geography, and he has helped me to systematize things. Because I would sit and say, fuck, and he would say, no, we have to have another look at it, you know. So maybe formulate it in a different way, you know, and that was very helpful for me to have this guy involved, you know. So this is based on our so what is it that I talk about? Okay, we could call it the non-profit housing in Denmark, or the housing for common use. What is it? It's the backbone of the Danish urban commons. Approximately 1 million tenants are living there. It is traditionally housing for all classes, and there's a reasonable high level of social justice. What this means, I mean, there could be a lot of technical explanation by all these things, but I'll try to skip it. But what this entails is that all these units, that we have, you could be on a waiting list to get in. So in that sense, it's democratically accessible for everybody. But then you can begin to ask questions, what about the prices? And so certain areas would be more kind of interesting to live in and things like that. That is true. But therefore they have also installed this little thing called the 1/4 principle. And this means that the municipalities has access to 1/4 of the apartments. And they make a very simple count in all these things. So 1, 2, 3 goes to different places in the waiting list. Number 4 goes to the municipality. And this would be a person in need. So this is the system. Very kind of social democratic all these kinds of. And then they have this embedded democratic structure, local, regional, and national scales of bodies where you can be elected or appointed to these different levels. So there's this global national element. Then you can, of course, come back to the local global thing, and that is, of course, the problems. But they have tried to deal with it within the framework of the national. So that is, of course, also then the story of a successful state capitalistic exploiting Northern European thingy. But this is what they have done. Okay? And this is special, it's the special feature of the Danish version, because it took different paths in the different Scandinavian countries, and this is the only place where they still have this democratic structure left. Okay? And then we can look at the Danish housing structure. We have more than 50% owner occupied. You see that the private rental went through a process of commoning, we could call it. So there was an increase in the non-profit housing units after the Second World War. So a little bit it would be the equivalent period to the Million program in Sweden, but at a lower scale. And we have public and cooperatives. And I will talk about these non-profit units. So it's today a little bit more than 20%. Data is only up until 2004. But this point about there was a kind of a process of commoning going on here, where the private rentals were going on. So the purpose to outline the rise of the Danish model of association-based housing outside or on the edge of the market. So this is also a different feature, and it can be a bit hard to explain it, but it means it's not municipal housing. It is organized in association outside the state and outside the market for very particular historical reasons, because the path that Denmark took was that there was never a social democratic majority. They always had to operate between this liberal capitalism and their social democratic ideals. So it was never installed as something that was part of the state. And then we want to investigate how the association-based model has been profoundly challenged by the past decades of neoliberal housing politics. So in that sense, it's not a very unique story. We've heard this throughout the world, but in this particular case, it didn't go like it did in many other places for these reasons that I will try to tell you. So a brief history, and I'll not go through it, but we have done it as we have tried to do our best to look at how it happened and for what reasons and with whom involved. So it's all in the paper. I'll not go through it. But what we will focus on, in this talk is the things that happened in the 2000s, in the beginning of 2000, because there was some very subtle tactics to overthrow this system. So, we call it a reform without a reform. There was a neoliberal majority right coalition that took power in 2001, and the Prime Minister was Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who is today the General Secretary of NATO. And he had been preparing for this for a long time. He had seen how other places have tried to get rid of the social state. And he had a book called From Social State to Minimal State that he did in his youth, so he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He's an economist, so he studied very carefully all these tactics, and he showed in this book an outline how to do it. So when he took power, he was 20 years older, so in his 50s, he was ready. And the way he wanted to do it was through subtle means. He saw that he couldn't really go up front with this thing because it was so embedded in all kinds of ways in the mentality of the Danes. So he tried really to change the kind of perception about how we think about a lot of things. So he called it actually up front a cultural war. But then everybody jumps on that thing. So there was a lot of things going on around the cultural war. That was declared. But then they had all kinds of other subtle strategies that seemed very unassuming. And that is the thing that I want to draw attention to. When we go out there and we look at things, we tend to focus our attention to the places where people are shouting and screaming. That is very important to do, and there may be a lot of desperation going on that we need to attend to absolutely. But there's also other things going on that may not draw our attention in the first place. And I was sitting through this period in different democratic bodies, so I tried in this very collective way to deal with these kind of sort of tactics. I'll not go through it all, but that's the basic of the thing. We can organize it in 3 strikes, and then normally you would say 3 strikes and you are out. That's the kind of American way of the baseball thing. But in this case, they had this tactic of 3 strikes, right? And it didn't work really, but they did do some nasty things. The first strike, which was really upfront in the very beginning, you see 2002, I mean, so they were ready for this thing. So they appropriated our collective savings. And that's a long description of what this thing is, but that is just, we have been saving up for a rainy day. And we have billions, right? Or we used to have billions, but they took these things. I mean, so accumulation by disposition. Okay, that's the simple way to explain it. Second strike, they tried to introduce a Thatcherite right to buy legislation in 2004. And this would actually be what we would expect on our side. So we were preparing for that one. The other one, I mean, it took us by surprise, and they did all kinds of rude things. But the other one, we were prepared. So we played ball, and we said, okay, I mean, there are a few of these places that, I mean, if people want to buy them, I mean, we have problems to kind of rent them out and things. I mean, so yeah, let's look at it. And then we went into the, I mean, I say we, but I mean, I was just this little tiny figure here. But that was the kind of, that was what was done. I mean, I was not any one of these guys standing there, but I was the little kind of machinery of a huge, well-organized collective. I mean, that he had to get with this thing. And then they went into this process of registration, and they made it because they knew the system. I mean, they were sitting on the other side. They didn't really know what they were fighting here. So they make all kinds of complicated things that individual people who were living in one of these apartments say, I want to buy an apartment, that sounds like a simple thing, but no. I mean, it was organized so there had to be a kind of certain 60% of people living in one of these things had to be, united with this, and then you needed the association. It's organized in many associations. They had to say yes, and then the municipality. But on the ways there were all kinds of traps installed and things like that. And why is this important? I think it is important in a general way that we look at all these kinds of things, because there's of course a broader process that we've been talking about over the weeks and things like that. Because the fight for urban commons, as Stuart Hodgkinson say in a recent paper, and I don't know him, but I've just recently come across his stuff. He is excellent, because I think that he has been doing some of the things that I have been through, but he's good at doing the kind of phase that I'm in now. He just gets it. So he writes here, fighting for urban commons rests on three ethics of commoning. The prefigurative desire to live in common and solve our housing problems collectively in the here and now. The strategic need to defend and reduce anti-capitalist commons that impose the limits to capital and open up for outside to accumulation. And the hegemonic quest for an alternative world in which commons and commoning can be generalized at the expense of capitalism. So therefore, of course, this corner is important in the whole kind of fight. And I will end there, but I'll end there with a quote so that you can understand because I did some work together with Eric Clark in this process in Copenhagen, just in the midst of where I was sitting in this whole process. That was before this new government came into power. But we were doing work on globalization of the commercial property market and other things, and we were interviewing the head of planning in Copenhagen, Holger Bisgaard, and we were trying we asked for different things, but he continued to come back to this thing about housing. And he said to us, and that was, we were not asking him about this thing, we said, to my opinion, for me, housing policy is the key to Copenhagen's development. We can't change the housing stock. We'll continue to be the poorest municipality in the capital regions. We won't change the type of people living here. And so the municipality won't become sustainable. We have made a study that shows that we get all the trash, part of the expression, because of the cheap housing. The middle classes who would want to stay, they move to Sweden. And so this was the kind of thing that was going on, but not officially. Okay.
Good. So that did not really happen, what this guy said, as I will try to show in the second part of this talk, which comes up with, I hope, a rather original take on commons. And what I would like to tell you is the story of a very unassuming town most of you have never heard of, the city of Landskrona in Sweden, which is very close to the city of Malmö, the very south of Sweden, where the municipality has decided to collectivize basically the entire city center to induce a process of exclusion, displacement, and gentrification, because the private sector is not doing what they normally do. So it's the municipality who steps in to do what they are usually best at. I will just give you in 1 minute a brief overview of the general condition of the housing market in Sweden, which, as I've said already in the beginning, is increasingly dysfunctional. We have acute housing shortage due to the inactivity of the construction sector in mass construction. They do build quite a lot of elite housing, but hardly any new affordable housing. We see a systematic process of the conversion of rental housing stock to tenant-owned housing stock over the past 2 years. Something like 100,000 units of rental housing stock have been turned into tenant-owned housing stock, which means that there are, the level of rental housing stock where most people make their entry into the housing market is just not growing. It's actually shrinking. Together with the rapidly rising urban population, Stockholm grows by about 30,000 people per year. This, of course, creates an acute housing shortage. Process of ongoing deregulation, of course, the state has basically lost its grip over what's happening in the housing market. And a very Swedish thing, back in the 60s and the 70s, it was the state that initiated a so-called million program to build 1 million homes for people, to create a housing market that was functional. And Sweden being Sweden, they did build 1 million homes in a matter of 10 years. That housing stock, which is a very substantial chunk of the housing stock in Sweden, has to be renovated, it's true. But attached to this major renovation works, we see emerging a process of renovation, as I will try to show later. People react to this acute housing shortage in all kinds of ways, of course. The businesses, they see in that a golden opportunity to call for more deregulation, of course. They say like, well, we have been deregulating the housing market. If it's still dysfunctional, it's because we need even more, and even less state intervention, which is of course a normal or an expectable reaction of the businesses. People adapt and everyday in the days they're expanding, they move far away from the city stories, very well. More interesting for us, we see the rise of new or newish urban social movements that are popping up, particularly on peripheral estates where a lot of these people of non-Swedish origin live. Those who are suffering from the lack of affordable housing in the first instance. And they not only fight the housing shortage, but they're also very active in, for example, the recent wave of police violence and police harassment that has been going on now for months in Sweden. Stigmatization of the states, housing shortage. In Gothenburg and Malmö, they call themselves Pantrarna, which means the banders. They look a bit scary in the Swedish context, but they're pretty okay. They connect with academics and researchers and everything. And they're very active. They're always there when it is needed. Their main action is basically demonstration. Inspired by the Black Panthers. And in Stockholm, there is an organization called Megaphone, which means the megaphone. I just put it there because that symbol very well. A united state can never be conquered, it says. That's one of the slogans. All power to the people is their other slogan. So what I've set myself the research agenda after summer to study these movements and to engage with these movements. And then hopefully, when you all come to Lund for the spring school in April, where the theme is social movements, I can tell you something more about these people. So they protest in particular, how these renovation programs are used to implement shock rental increases in many of these municipal housing associations, and of course against sellouts. That's just one example of a municipality where they sold 1,300 apartments in one go to the private sector. This Megaphone has this organization called Harakat, which means in Persian, Arab, and something else, Turkish, it means movements. That is a place once per week they invite artists, poets, researchers to discuss and to connect in many ways. Good. I'm going to present you a case that does not fit into this overall story, okay? Again, I'm talking about people living in these houses, just like Anders showed, very unassuming housing blocks on streets which you normally only use to go from A to B, and you would not bother or care what is happening on those streets. This is the city center of the city of Landskrona. For those who don't know where that is, you see there Copenhagen, and if you cross the border, that's Malmö, that's Sweden, that's where I live. Peaceful Lund, and then you get not so peaceful Landskrona, just north of Lund. This is a city that suffered from shipyard closures. People left the city, and they have now taken in a lot of war refugees, because that was the only way to keep the housing stock going. In the early 90s, people from the Balkan countries in particular, also people from Palestine and other people. So the city has been transformed into one of the few places in Sweden, in a city which is dominated by non-Swedes. Very unusual in a Swedish context. If you go, you've probably been to Stockholm or in Gothenburg, as white as it can get. You know, this is one of the few places where the inner city is dominated by non-Swedes, which bothers a few people, including the mayor who's sitting there, as you can see, with a plan behind his head. So he's got a plan, he's got a big plan, he's got a drastic plan, which and that would be the overall argument of what I'm trying to say here, induces a new or a radical transformation of urban renewal of housing provision in Sweden, from very gentle to not so gentle anymore. He's been doing very bold statements. You may find that unassuming, but in Sweden that's a pretty shocking thing to say. My message to all welfare recipients is do not move to Landskrona. If you have a problem, then please ask elsewhere, where you are likely to get more attention. So what we see here, you know, the city of Landskrona has been working, and I'm not going to go into that for years and years, with a very social approach. You know, working with sports clubs and schools and all that. Inspired by social science, even led by social scientists. They are all out of the door. The city has now hired, you know, a consultant firm, a firm that gives advice to developers and construction companies and housing owners. And they developed a plan to deal with the fact that there are so many poor people living in the city of Landskrona. This is the plan. I will try to be brief. It says change. You know, this is in Swedish, and they believe, you know, that the very simple hypothesis these guys have is: if you change the housing stock, if you take away this affordable rental housing stock, then new people will move in and they will pay taxes, and everything will be okay. In one word, unemployment will go down, education performance will go up, etc., etc. That is the radical plan. So. That is what they're going to do. They're going to try to change the entire housing stock of the inner city center. Therefore, they have started a company called City Development, and it is 95.5% financed by the city. So there is some kind of token involvement of the private sector, so they can call it public-private partnership. But it is actually the city that pays for it. Through the municipal pension fund. So they have pumped 100 million Swedish crowns into this city development company, and the money comes from the municipal pension fund. That is risky, right? So the plan is to fill the municipal pension fund again by building these fancy waterfront apartments north of the city. Another 1,300 apartments, and hopefully, nobody knows, because the developers are not very interested in doing this. But hopefully, you know, it will happen, so we can fill the pension fund again. Otherwise, good, 1,500 for this. So that's the plan of action. What it loses, you know, is of course it's a real passion to overhaul the social fabric. This is about rent gap, but not only about rent gap. This is about deeply xenophobic motives, you know, deeply emotional motives to deal with an existing public population in the city you do not want. The means to do that is to create a common, you know, a municipally owned city center, or at least a housing stock, you know, through collectivizing a mainly private-owned housing stock, to pursue what the private sector does not do elsewhere, to increase the rent, to create a tenant-owned housing stock, to create a population of white citizens. So what we here get is a sort of perverse introduction of a common, you know, collectivization to seek that. Okay, Hans has been talking about, you know, these side attacks on and gentrification in Copenhagen. What I would like to think, you know, looking at the case of Landskrona, is that we're witnessing the nature of gentrification in Scandinavia, from gentle to mental, you know, or from gentle to not so gentle. And a change in the very idea of what affordable housing stands for. You know, from as it was a solution in the 60s and in the 70s, as I mentioned, this million program, to a serious problem. Provision of affordable housing is no longer a solution that has become the very problem itself, and it is, you know, therefore because we get rid of this provision of affordable housing. And a pretty nasty process of, you know, from renovation of houses as is always needed, to coupling that to eviction. You know, and that's why we call it renovation. Okay, let's have a look briefly at this idea of the transition from gentle gentrification, as Anders has called it, looking at Copenhagen examples, to something we could call brutal gentrification or explicit gentrification, as you want. For example, the head of planning said in the newspapers, you know, these are all unserious tenants whom should be returned to the municipalities where they come from. So for him, it's nothing else than a deportation program. Or the mayor, you know, please do not come here if you're on welfare benefits. As I think it was Eric said a few days ago, you know, there's no secret in there anymore. The state says, you know, exactly what it wants, exactly what it's going to do, which of course is part and parcel of the brutal nature of this new type of gentrification. There are not even good intentions put on the table. The state says what it's going to do. So gone is, you know, social concern, gentility. There are no hidden aims any longer. There are no flank attacks anymore. And what they now have started to do is to imagine, you know, a city without an existing population, as if you can do a tabula rasa again, as the modern utopians did 100 years ago. Imagine a city that is not there, so you can start all over again. That is on the table in Landskrona, and I would like to think quite a radical transformation in the nature of city renewal in a Scandinavian context. I will skip those figures that would take us into too much detail, but of course, if you read all these reports, and I've done the effort to read all these planning documents and analysis, the way they use statistics, you know, is quite shocking, and they use them in a systematic way to dystopianize the existing inner city and highlight all kinds of problems, which, you know, a long time ago or not so long ago used to be an issue for social concern. Used to be an issue to come up with welfare policies, are now used. These figures are now used against those people. Just to give you one figure, this is one of the key figures that I'm using all the time, the increase of the number of people on low income in the city of Landskrona from 13 to 20% in a matter of 15 years. This is terrible, right? We need to stop this. We can't carry on like that. The figure that is never mentioned is that, you know, the number of people on high income in the city of Landskrona has increased with an almost similar proportion, you know, from 15 to 21 in the same period. What you get is not, you know, an increase of 4 people or a number of 4 people. What you get is a polarization, of course. That's what I highlight. In the paper, I go into more detail about how these statistics are used and abused to create a certain picture that dystopianizes the inner city and therefore, you know, paves the way for the installation of what we could call a revanchist utopia. A tabula rasa, totally new population. Get rid of all these poor people. They can go wherever they want. We want, you know, we, these white Swedes, want our city back. We're going to do everything we can. We're going to start a new housing company, we're going to massage statistics, and all this has now resulted in the approval of this plan, waiting for implementation. Creating a common will lead to conflict and potentially disaster for those people who live there. We're talking about thousands of people. Okay. Second major transformation I want to briefly talk about is, the affordability as a topic, which of course you could say, is a paradox in itself. Back in the 60s, in the heydays of social democracy in Sweden, housing was very constitutive of the formation of the Swedish welfare state. It was at the very core, was one of the cornerstones of the Swedish welfare state, providing affordable housing through this famous million program to install welfare, to install equality, and to install democracy. Good housing for all was very central to that. Affordability was key to the formation of the Swedish model. Gunnar Myrdal, for example, you probably know or have heard of. Housing conditions were taking a central position. An improvement of these was an important part of the reforms proposed to strengthen families' economies and raise the youngest generation quality. Or social and economic gaps should be erased and democracy would be implemented. Such was the belief in the role of housing and the importance of it, that it was the very cornerstone of the foundation of the society, a good society, a democratic society, an egalitarian society. What we see now, and as I hopefully have shown in the case of Landskrona, is how this idea of affordability as a cornerstone of society, has now become not a solution but a problem. To get rid of this idea of affordability is now constitutive of an anti-welfare model, if you would like to call it like that. We've gone from some kind of welfare idea to exactly the opposite property, an anti-welfare idea underpinning city renewal in the city of Landskrona. The state plays, instead of there is no withdrawal of the state, the opposite is happening. The state steps back in, is very active in buying or going to buy the housing stock, a very authoritarian state, strengthening the state, creating a problem that can be steered in an authoritarian way. Okay, last point. Are we doing fine time? As I already mentioned, of that famous housing stock built in Sweden between 1961 and 1975, 850 were built by municipalities. 300,000 of them are in need of renovation, and it's not really sure how much that would cost. Depends on how heavily you renovate, of course, but it would be something between 50 and 275 billion Swedish crowns. And the main work is replumbing. Sorry to be so down to earth, but that is important, because if you do replumbing in an apartment block, you usually also, or you can easily renovate the kitchens and bathrooms in one go. So that's where the idea of major renovation comes from. Now, some of these housing associations have been saving up for that, as you would expect them to do. Others, have not. And what is happening now, and we see examples popping up left and right, a bit everywhere, is that these housing associations do renovate, and people are presented with a 60%, a 70%, a 40% rent increase after major renovation, new kitchens, and all that. The problem with that is that it's built. These estates, most of these estates built in the 60s and the 70s, were in those days built far out of town, like half an hour away from Stockholm or half an hour away from Gothenburg, behind the forest, with an underground or a tram connection. Today, in the face of this acute housing shortage, these estates have become very, very, very attractive, because they're only half an hour away from the city center, and they have an underground connection, which is perfect for upper middle class families to live and then commute to the city center. So this need for renovation, and some call it, the plumbing hysteria, because not everyone agrees with the fact that we do need to spend so much money on major renovation, but it's happening anyway. There are several examples of places where people have stood up and started to protest, and they are connected. They know each other, and that could potentially be the basis of a major social movement. So what we I've got a picture there in the beginning somewhere. That's what's happening. This is outside Stockholm. A dull block of affordable rental housing being turned into something completely different, right? So the difference is 80% in rent. Okay, so that is what is happening on a more systematic basis today. So there is, I'm not making this up. A major wave of displacement is looming. What we see now is, isolated incidents. We see it's happening a bit here, a bit there. But, those estates outside the cities of Sweden seem to be facing, or could be facing, a major wave of displacement of people, the poor people moving further away from the city and go and live where there's no. And here, I think, lies the brutality and the injustice of the Landskrona case. I've been trying to represent, and now shut up. They don't have that problem in Landskrona, okay? There is no acute housing shortage. They have a decent housing stock. The Municipal Housing Association has saved up money in Landskrona, etc., etc. It's what is called officially in legal terms. It has a housing market imbalance. They don't have an issue. So let's create one. And that, I think, is where the insensitivity and the brutality and the injustice of this Landskrona case lies. They want to, by through heavy authoritarian involvement of the state, create a big city problem, create an housing shortage, at least for poor people. Okay.